Welcome to my introduction to the Supercharged Milner-Barry Gambit, my Chessable course that I co-created with Ben Davar. The mini course contains 20 trainable variations, 10 in the Hector, 5 in the Advance and 5 early deviations. There's an introduction to the Hector and the Advance, and there is in the introduction also one variation dedicated to the pawn structure. Then there are tactics to reinforce some tactics that are typical in these in the Milner-Barry Gambit, and some tactics that relate to critical moves that have to be played, and then there are model games that show how typical plans are being executed. I'm going to switch now to Lichess and show you how the course was created specifically for club players, and we go through the lines and the plans. So here you can see the Lichess interface, and I selected in the Lichess database the games of players 1600 to 2500 in the end who played rapid and classical. So that's how I selected the lines for the course and how I prioritize them, because I think those are the lines that club players are most likely to get over the board. And so let's have a look. E4, E6, D4, D5, so now we're in the French advanced, C5, C3. And if we look here, right after C3, just for you to remind yourself, there are 3.2 million games played in rapid and classical in Lichess in this rating band of 1600 to 2500. So later on, when we getting into the woods, remember that we started off with 3.2 million games. In general, let's have a look at this structure. So the pawn chain C3, D4, E5 gives white more space and leaves black with a cramped position. With E5, the pawn on E5, white controls the square F6, so making it hard to find a good square for the knight on G8. Black's bishop on C8, of course, is hemmed in by the pawn chain and is notoriously bad. White's ideal setup is bishop D3, knight A3, knight C2, securing the pawn on D4 with knight C2 and knight F3. And so black often tries to put pressure on the pawn on D4 with moves like C5, like that has already been played, knight C6 and queen B6. So the typical plans for white are attacks black's king after black's castle short, and often we see the theme of the Greek gift with bishop takes H7 followed by knight G5. Continue to restrict the harmonious development of the black pieces by threatening to trap them, by chasing them, and by playing H4 after the knight comes to E7. So if the knight goes to G6, we can chase the knight back with the move H5. And queenside expansion, chase the queen on B6 back and have more space and a lead in development. And so in this structure, we often see that this bishop on F8 and the knight on G8 have a hard time finding good squares and are tripping over each other and sometimes get trapped. So let's go back to the lines. So you can see knight C6 is played in over 60% of the games. And we continue in our course. Knight F3, and now the signature move for the Hector variation is queen B6, and for the advanced variation is bishop D7. So I'm going to focus. You can see queen B6 is 52% of the games. Still 1 million games, so very relevant, and bishop d7, 320,000 games. Also a lot of games. So queen b6, right? We're just following the main lines that are being played here. Now we play bishop d3. So after bishop d7 we play bishop e2, and after queen b6 we play bishop d3. And now most of the times you can see bishop d7 is the main line. And this chord is also inspired by the book from Graham Jones, Coffee House Repertoire 2. And he said basically it doesn't go really well together, these moves, so we have now time to take on c5. And after bishop takes c5, we just castle. And we can see that in 34% of the cases, black plays knight e7. Can you see why knight e7 is a bad move? Right? Black just wants to develop and finalize the development of the knight and the bishop on c5. But why is that a losing move? Because after knight e7 we have the move b4 and we are trapping the bishop on b6. So this is the first example of the themes that we had where the piece can get trapped. So let's go back and see, right, we just go back and say, okay, imagine after castle, right, we had knight g to e7, 34% of the cases. Let's go to the next one, a5. Right, so our next is 8,000 games, a5, right. Now we cannot play rook e1 because the pawn on f2 is hanging, so we play queen e2 to fortify the pawn on. And now we develop knight e7, knight d2, knight g6, and knight b3, attacking the bishop on c5, and we bring our knight to d4. And we just have more space, and this is like a position where white is like better, like +1. It's not like a crushing result, but it's a very pleasant position to play. So let's go back. After we were branching out here, knight e7, b4 wins a piece. And we saw that after a5, to prevent the move b4, right, we are just going to play queen e2, knight d2, knight b3 with a very pleasant position. The other option for black, of course, is to make space for the bishop, play queen c7. So you can see 16% of the cases we play b4, we kick the bishop back, the pawn on e5 is now 2 times under attack. It's under attack by the bishop and the knight, so we defend it one more time. Black develops a knight, and please have a look, right? We started off with 3.2 million games, and we're now in under 1,000 games. So we continue here, knight a3, only played in, let's say, 100 games. You can see it scores 56%, so total 59% for white, including the draws. And now we continue with c4, and you can see there's only a handful of games left, but this is our plan. So we played knight a3 with the threat of knight b5, knight to d6. Black prevents that with a6. We want to play c4, but the pawn on b4 would be hanging. So first we defend the pawn on b4, and after knight g6 we play c4. And it's here you could ask yourself, right, what happens? Are we not losing a pawn here? Can you see the refutation of knight takes e5? So You can see in terms of number of games it's not very relevant, but in terms of the tactic that's in the position, we win it by pinning the piece on e5 to the queen on c7. So we go back to knight c6 and c4. We break open the center, and if black decides to take, we also win a piece. Can you see how? Right, so this is the other way. How are we winning a piece here? Well, the queen is defending two pieces. So we capture one of the pieces that the queen is defending. Then we clear the line of the queen on d1, and we win the piece on d7. So that was, let's go back. We were here. We said in 34% of the cases we win a piece immediately with trapping the bishop. After a5 we play queen e2, knight d2, knight b3 with harmonious development. And after queen c7, to make space for the bishop, we play b4, chase the bishop, and then we continue. We defend our pawn on e5 with rook e1, and then bring our knight to a3, threatening knight b5. And after a6, rook b1, we are going to play c4 and have a very comfortable position. So let's go further up in the chain of the tree. So we were here at and after bishop d3, we can see here, right, 52% is bishop d7, but it also happens together 87% that black already immediately releases the tension. Now we get into the signature move of the supercharged Milner-Barry. We're not going to defend, and we're not going to take back on d4, but we castle. And you can see here in 53% of the cases, black actually takes. And it's interesting, so we are sacrificing a pawn, but white is actually better here according to the engine. So we have more than one pawn compensation for because we have such a lead in development. So if we just make a few normal moves, right, bishop d7, and now rook e1 is our main move. You can see here we went from the 3.2 million, we're now in let's say between 1 and 2,000 games. And you can see, right, so a lot of starting players, they would say, okay, I have to bring my bishop and my knight out on f8 and g7. So the most played here is a3. We just immediately question that bishop. The knight goes to e7. Right, we play a4 with the idea of playing bishop a3, right, and then we are covering all those lines. And you can see there are two moves here, knight g6 or castle. And after castle, we immediately get our theme of the Greek gift with bishop takes h7. And if black is aware, right, let's go back. We're only on, right, I mean, out of these 3.2 million games, we're here at 36 and 28. So unlikely, but it's important to understand the theme. Knight g6, we play bishop a3, and we are much better because black is not getting to castling. So you can see how difficult it is for black to finalize their development. Let's go back to rook e1. Rook e1, and so bishop b4, it was the first one we saw, knight e7, and now you see the theme that we are not allowing this knight to develop at ease and go to g6. On f5 it could be taken, and then the queen on d5, the pawn on d5 would be hanging, right, if the knight goes here. then we can take afterwards with the knight on d5. So it's not likely that black will play that. So we play h4 with the idea, if the knight comes to g6, to kick it immediately back. And then you can see there are some waiting moves. And again, right, we sacrifice a pawn, but in this position white is much better. We have an enormous lead in development. And look at the development of black, right? The king is still in the middle. The rooks are not connected. The bishop on f8 is not developed. So we have a very comfortable position. So let's see if there are any other moves that we have to discuss. So after castling, we looked at d takes c3. Of course, the other alternative is now to play bishop d7. And now we play our move rook e1. And after, you can see that actually there's a transposition, right, with d takes c3. So most of the times this goes back to the previous line that we just discussed. But imagine that it is becoming a transposition, so we go to the second line, knight e7. Again, we are playing our signature move h4 to prevent this knight from settling down on g6, and we can immediately chase it after knight g6 with the move h5. And yes, so okay, so we were in the tree, we were here, right, and we discussed c takes d4. We discussed bishop d7. Right, so we have to go further back in the tree now. And now, right, queen b6 was the main line of the Hector variation. Now we go to the advance. So bishop d2. And now bishop d7. And now we play bishop e2 and now bishop e3. Because we don't want to end up in the normal Milner-Barry variation. We want to have the supercharged one where we castle instead of taking back on d4. So bishop e2, and you can see, right, that in this variation, before you know it, like we are getting into a transposition, because now queen b6 is the move that is most played. Right, so queen b6, castle, take, knight e7, knight c3, knight f5, knight a4. We are kicking the queen away, attacking the queen, and then we're kicking the knight back, and we have a lot more space, and we're not actually afraid for h5. And now you can see already how many games there are left, because we are black doesn't have time to add attackers to the pawn on d4. So that is after bishop d7, bishop e2. We had queen b6, and then the second move is knight e7. After knight e7, and this is actually quite solid option, we castle, and here you can see knight f5 is the most played move. Now there's the threat of queen b6 and taking on d4 with 3 attackers on this pawn. So we take on c5 and we play bishop d3 with the threat of attacking this, taking the pawn on d5 afterwards. So you can see here, black is basically going to reroute this knight to g6, and it can do it in 2 ways, over h4 or over e7. But it's of course another move with the knight. And I'm not wanting to go in much detail further here, because look at the number of games that have been played, right? So this is just, right, we're just going to develop our pieces, and we have a very comfortable position. But there's only 18 games out of the 3.2 million. Yes, so let's go back to where we were. After knight f3, we looked at bishop d7. Of course, what also can happen is that black plays knight e7, right? And now this is blocking the bishop from f8, looking to a3. So we are opting here to play knight f3, and after knight f2, we go knight f5, we go knight c2, and now we have two defenders of this pawn on d4, and we get our ideal setup. For instance, right, we see queen b6, bishop d3, c takes d4, c takes d4, bishop d7. Now, right, there are three attackers, but you can see here, right, we are just ignoring the threat of knight takes d4, and that's for a reason, as you will see. Because in this case, most played, 57% of the cases, knight takes d4. And again, we win a piece, right, because we have two pieces attacking the knight. And of course the knight can take something, but we take first on c5 and then threaten the queen. So we get to a winning position. So again, there's many cases where the pawn, taking the pawn by black, is poisoned. We saw it before on e5, where we won a piece with bishop f4, and now we see it after knight takes d4, that this pawn is also poisoned, because we can pin the piece, and if black defends with bishop c5, we can immediately attack the defender with b4, and black is losing. So knight e7 we were looking at, knight a3 to get the ideal setup with knight c2 and bishop d3, knight c2. Okay, so we looked at queen b6. So there is, of course, there's another option that black takes it more slowly. So now this is the ideal setup, right? And after castle, again we get a winning position because of, you could say, the unstable combination of the bishop on e7 and the knight on f5. So we chase the knight has only really one good square, take the knight, right, we play g5 with the threat of attacking the trapped bishop, so the bishop takes, we still play this, and now we play rook g1. And again, we are having a winning position because of our strong attack. So this is a combination of the two themes, attack on the king side, and at the same time at trapping a piece, right, the vulnerability of the knight and the bishop. And yes, what do you think here can happen, right? Bishop takes c1, right, and then let's see how it continues here. Rook takes c1. Of course, in the big threat here is queen takes h7, so you can see what is most played here, f5 and king h8. Let's look at king h8, right, and now it's white just plays a quiet move, king e2, with the idea of sacking on g7 with the rook, right? If I just play a random move, you can see it. Rook takes g7, king takes g7, rook g1. So it's connecting the rooks, and after the king goes away, it would be mate. So that is the threat in the position. So another beautiful winning position that occurred after knight e7. So here we are. let's see where we are in the tree. So we discussed bishop d7, we discussed knight g to e7, right? That was our last one. We discussed the advanced variation with bishop d7. So there's now just for us left to look at two early deviations. So after c3, right? What you can see many times in children's games and beginners games is that they just trade, develop the knight. So they don't understand if you trade that you release the tension on d4. They give a check, knight c3, bishop goes there, bishop d3, castle, and immediately we have, and the game just started on move 9, a winning attack with the Greek gift after h4, and black can resign. Yes, and it's interesting to see actually after bishop d3 castle, right, that in 55% of the cases white just made the automatic castle, but we have the winning move bishop takes h7 here. So again, a confirmation of the theme of the strong attack on the king side, and that has also to do with this pawn structure, that the pawns on d4 and e5 are hemming in black. Finally, queen b6, right? And now let's see, bishop f3, and you can see, right, in 82% of the cases, knight c6 is being played, and we're getting into a transposition. So the only reason why black would probably play this is to play bishop d7, so we're ignoring the first one because it's a transposition. And after bishop d7, right, to immediately exchange the bishops with bishop b5. That is the idea. We are just playing this, and now we take here, right? You can see bishop takes e5, and we question here this bishop. And you can see it's not too many games, but in the majority of the games, black takes on f2. We play king e2, bishop takes d3, king takes d3, and this, right, and after knight c6, we play rook f1, and this bishop is trapped. So after queen b6, we have the opportunity, many times black wants to trade the bishops with bishop b5, but we take on c5, asking the bishop to come out, and then after b4, if the bishop takes on f2, we trap it with king e2, rook f1, because the bishop has no square to go back to. And after bishop e7, we play bishop e3, and this is actually also a winning position for white already, right? So the queen is in real trouble. Of course, the queen has to continue to defend. So there's only one move, really, is queen a6. And then we avoid the trade and threaten to play a4, and the queen is being chased and under a lot of trouble while white expands on the queen side. So this was my introduction to the Milner-Barry Gambit. What we saw, the pawn chain c3, d4, e5 gives white more space. We saw that the knight on g8 and the bishop on f8 are tripping over each other in different ways. It could be bishop c5, knight e7 and a trap with b4. It could be that the bishop is on e7 and knight is on f5. We play g4 and after knight h4. The bishop gets in trouble because we are combining it with the king side attack. We saw a few times the Greek gift appearing. And we saw in general that the queen on b6 is not completely stable. Often it got chased and you were getting a lead in development. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe, like the video, and also check out my videos that I recorded on the chess steps method. There are 20 videos, and let me know what you think of them. Thank you.